Nipsey Hussle, who the LAPD praised as almost a hero.
Not almost. They did say the things that he was doing in his community, they said were extremely heroic. The day after his murder, they held a news conference. They spoke glowingly about him.
They did indeed.
And as they were doing that,
they were in the middle of a criminal investigation involving Nipsey Hussle, and it all centers around his Marathon clothing store and what appears to be what the police believed was a hotbed of gang activity.
Right.
Now, this is really interesting, and I'm just going to say this. I mean, look, the LAPD is very conscious of the community, all communities in LA, but especially in South LA, because there's been a history there of tension. And, I think what they're trying to do now is, they didn't want this out, for sure. And the New York Times first found out about this, but we've confirmed that there was this investigation going on, not just with Nipsey, but his business associates as well. Now, I can't get a complete answer about what it was that they felt he was doing that was criminal.
Right.
But
what specific activity was happening there, allegedly happening there, why they were investigating him and his business associates. And I will say, I rewatched this morning the full news conference that happened the day after his murder. And the police chief did speak for several minutes about an increase of violence in the area. Never specifically said Marathon clothing store.
Well, we know,
threw out numbers and said that in that area there had been, I think 3 times it had tripled the number of weekly shooting incidents, and that the police were very concerned about that. And then he went on to say, but Nipsey's murder is something separate from that. Well, we don't believe it's related to that.
Except that, remember, Nipsey was at the store to help a guy that was out of prison, and he has done this before where people who were involved in gangs in the past, he would try and help them so they didn't go back in, and he'd give them clothes, he'd help find them jobs. So it seems counter to what this investigation was showing. Now, the New York Times is also saying that a couple of years before Nipsey's murder, the police were quietly trying to get the landlord to evict him from Marathon Clothing.
That is shocking.
So they could get him out of there and get new tenants in. And as it turned out, Nipsey bought the building, bought the whole complex.
Well, and it kind of makes you wonder, because in that same press conference, they also said, Nipsey was supposed to meet with city leaders and talk about gun violence and how to end it in his area. It almost makes you wonder if that little meeting or get-together was possibly part of their investigation, too, where they'd ask him questions about it.
Well, I've got some information on that I talked to some people who were involved in all of that, and I don't think it was, because what I'm told is that there was a tip-off that nobody quite got at the time, but when Nipsey asked for that meeting with the police chief, they did not immediately say yes. It took them a month to say yes. And there were people involved in this who told me that it was odd that the police did not want to embrace this at first, and it may well be because of this investigation going on. Now, one other thing that is weird to me, that our police sources are saying that they weren't necessarily investigating Nipsey for criminal activity as much as they were trying to investigate problems at the clothing store. That doesn't make sense to me, because according to the New York Times article and what I was told earlier today, Nipsey was a target of this
criminal prosecution.
If you're looking at the clothing store, you don't say the owner of the clothing store is under criminal investigation.
Harvey, I spoke to somebody also on this, and what they're saying is that whole shopping plaza has a lot of calls and a lot of crime, and they all accumulate, and that's kind of where it is. All those things add up into something that they're working on.
So the question, though, because there's something coming out of LAPD that this was not really Nipsey, it was more the clothing store.
It's more that whole complex, that whole thing. It's not just the complex. It's all the calls for service there, the gang activity there. It's accumulation of everything that's kind of adding up.